From a terrifying encounter inside an abandoned asylum to a relentless 8-year stalking nightmare and a routine trip to the gym that nearly turned fatal, these 3 chilling, real-life horror stories will remind you exactly why you should always trust your instincts. Now, this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play/park with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of decay. In front of us was a lifeless deer. Its remains were scattered across the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and became sick all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assumed was a dark substance and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks and his feet seemed injured. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the gathering?" he said, each word with varying inflection and energy. This pushed us over the edge and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We hurried out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to stay at the psychiatric ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. For context, I am now 26 and I met my stalker at 14 to 15. So when I was 14, I decided to take ballroom dance classes. That was kind of normal for teenagers in my generation in my country. There you had to change partners each song, so every girl would dance with every boy. In my group that consisted of mostly teens between 14 to 17, there was a really tall, almost 2-meter 21-year-old guy, Philip. We had a nice chat the times we danced, but he seemed weird. And because I was young and naive, and that's how I normally made friends, I told him where I lived when he asked me. So the stalking began at that time. I did not realize that it was stalking. I just thought he had much time and that it was annoying Philip would ride on his bike from his home. He lived one town over to my house and asked if I wanted to spend time outside with him play. After doing that for a few times, I asked my parents to tell him that I was not home when he would come over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very, very long time. At one point in time, the stalking ended for a few weeks and Philip also did not come to dance classes. At that time, I became part of a friend group of a boy I fancied. For some months he had a girlfriend, but they split soon after and I became his girlfriend. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of my BF, so he was also part of the group. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in mental hospitals multiple times, and every time he was, I was glad because then I had some peace. When I was 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady had thrown us out. She wanted to live in the property herself, so we moved one town over. We started living 2 streets apart from my stalker, and every time Philip was out of the hospital, he would be at my house. It was not as often, but still. At my father's birthday, he rang again, and because my family had guests, they told me to open the door. And there he was, standing over me like a dark, intense shadow man. I told him to leave, and I tried to close the door, but he held it open. So I was standing there, scared, asking him to leave. At one time, I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, but my dad said, "He is your friend, so it's your problem." So I went back to the door and I begged and pleaded that Philip please leave. At one point, he was sitting in my doorway. After almost 2 hours, he finally left. And at that point, it was obvious for me, finally, I had realized what type of behavior it was. He was a stalker, and he was fixated on me. The next day, I sat down with my parents and told them that I was afraid of Philip, and my dad also apologized to me for putting me in that situation and not supporting me. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him that I do not want any contact with him, so he left. After a few more incidents like that, he stopped showing up at my door, and I thought we got rid of my stalker. But every time I started to live happily, starting to forget my fear of him, a letter, an email, or a gift showed up and would send me back into my fears. At 20, I was out of school, and to pass the year, I had to wait to start my job. I worked in a grade school in a voluntary after-school care club for grade schoolers. After a month or two, my mom woke me up in the morning and told me to get dressed because she had called the police. Apparently, Philip was again every morning at our door and asked for me, and my parents didn't tell me so I wouldn't get scared again. Finally, after the police told Philip 3 times to leave and he ignored them, they took him away and he called out my name and said that he was overwhelmed with feelings for me and that the police were hurting him. My parents and I were standing in the kitchen listening. The situation felt so absurd and overwhelming that I began laughing uncontrollably myself hard. We submitted a report to the police regarding persistent following and unauthorized entry, but officers said they could not take action because there had been no physical harm. We attempted to obtain a protection order, but it was not approved. A week later, Philip had slipped into our garden, and as in a film, he tossed stones at my window. Throwing stones at a girl's window is not romantic, it's unsettling. I opened the window but did not see anything until it clicked, and I ran downstairs and told my dad that a man was in the garden. Philip departed a week after that. I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell again, and because we had no way of seeing who was at the door, I opened. And there he was again, telling me that he missed me and saying that he had looked through the blinds of the windows in the living room the past week to see if I was there. My parents were not home. If they had been, I would have run, but like this, I had to stay on my knees and stand in the doorway, listening to Philip talk until my different BF came. I had sent him in SOS SMS, and he was on his way. After my BF arrived, he told Philip to leave, and he did. Philip mentioned in passing that he now also has a gay fae. After that, I did not see Philip again for a long time. A friend told me that he was taken to a psychiatric hospital because he had believed that his mother was thought to be possessed by the devil. I was glad. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from court. I was a witness and told to attend in the case related to Philip. Apparently, after coming out of the psychiatric hospital, he had a serious argument with his girlfriend and she was hurt during the incident. Because she was scared, she acted as if she was unresponsive. Philip called an ambulance and the police finally had something to act on. After the hearing, he was admitted again to a mental hospital and I finally got a restraining order and he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from our property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements, he would go to jail. So it was over. 2 years ago, I also moved out of my parents' house. I'm posting this only now because I believe I'm seeing him again, but it can't be. He doesn't know where I live, and he also hasn't shown up at my parents' house. But I believe I've seen him when I leave the house. I just need reassurance that it's not him again and that I'm safe at my home. Update. So I installed a camera, and my neighbors also told me that there works a man that looks quite similar to Philip at the senior living center the street over. So for now, I think I'm safe. I believe I saw that person and not Philip. Thanks so much for all of your advice. I'm very grateful. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won. But instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off, or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking/twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp, and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon. But there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be led into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being stuck inside any longer, so as the man was trying to enter, I was trying to move our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to close the door and gently push us back. The man looked confused about what was happening and said, I think they want to go out. The lifeguard sighed, opened the door fully, and we quickly went away into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making dinner, and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating, and they didn't believe me. I still think about it sometimes, even today, with confusion and concern. I truly think that the situation felt extremely overwhelming at the time. The only doubt I have is what might have happened if things had gone differently. She would have been blamed for it in that scenario. What was her intention in that moment? I'm 21 now, but I still reflect on this experience often, especially in small spaces or when I feel too warm, and it can be distressing. No one really believes it, and I understand why it sounds unusual. I'm not sure if I should ask for opinions, but I wonder if this could have been a misunderstanding or if it was something else entirely. And why? I still think about it from time to time, even now today. We've reached the end of the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which story scared you the most? And if you were in the same situation, what would you do?